So in the past couple of years, we have seen a seismic shift in GMT watches. So-called true GMT calibers are more obtainable and available than ever before, with models like last year's Bulova Wilton bringing true GMT functionality to the sub $1,000 price point for the first time. And when I reviewed that watch, I was quick to point out what the new Miyota 9075 movement would mean for the broader watch world at large. And in this video, we'll take a closer look at a watch that's reaping the benefits of that movement with the Laurier Hydra GMT, a charming micro-brand dive watch with a true GMT caliber on the inside that demonstrates just how much things have changed for the better in a very short period of time. Let's jump in. Now, before we look at this watch, I do want to mention that if you are into GMT watches, we have a comprehensive guide for 2023 looking at over 25 of the best GMT watches in the world of watchmaking. So if you want a quick guide to that, I will link to it in the description down below. There's been a lot changing within this landscape of GMT watches. So if you are interested, check it out. It will be in the description, and check out some of our other guides if you want to stay in the loop for all of our new written content. We're doing some cool stuff all the time when it comes to our email subscriber list. So if you want to sign up, get the latest and greatest, like questions about knowing the backstory of, is Rolex a true nonprofit? What's the story behind that? The history of the El Primero chronographs, some of the best Swiss watch brands to know, over 50 in the industry. If you're interested in things like this, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website as well. Now, as much as I love micro brands and covering them on the channel, it is hard to be able to cover them as their own independent review at times, just because more people tend to not know what they are, and ultimately people don't watch. So it is sometimes a balance between giving people what they want and also covering something that's fresh and new. If you look at what gets the most views, just talk about Rolex, but that's not what it's all about. And why I wanted to cover this watch beyond just it being a pretty cool piece is what it means at large for the industry. So the model that we have here is the new Hydra Series III. It isn't just any micro brand watch, I think, because it represents, I would say, the changing of the guard in that value-packed GMT watches range and what we can expect going forward. Founded as recently as 2017 by a husband and wife team, Laurier has always been about modern watches that look and feel connected to a bygone era, even going so far as to equip their watches with crystals made from acrylic, a material that is almost completely absent from modern watchmaking. Now, at this point, I have had the chance to handle many of Laurier's watches, including reviewing pieces on the channel like their Falcon from a couple of years ago. And despite my appreciation and liking for their aesthetic approach, the world of smaller or micro brand watches in 2023 is as packed as it has ever been. And while models like their Neptune and Falcon are great solid choices for under $500, it's becoming harder and harder to break through from the busy crowd. But now let's shift into this Hydra, because I think the reason why this watch is more interesting and why I wanted to cover it is talking a little bit about where it's positioned in the market and creating an eyebrow-raising value proposition with the movement inside. While there are a number of aspects to touch on for this Hydra, let's discuss the reason why we ultimately wanted to cover it and have its own individual showcase, and that is the inclusion of the Miyota 9075 caliber. This movement was released alongside Bulova's Wilton model GMT last year, and at the time it totally revolutionized what was possible under $1,000 as a byproduct of the movement. Yet beyond that watch alone from Bulova, the most important and intriguing side detail of that release was what was going to happen with the 9075 movement and what would it mean for third parties going forward. The fact is, when most enthusiasts think of Miyota, the ubiquitous 8000 series calibers with their slower 3 Hz rate and sometimes larger accuracy range tend to be the first to come to mind. But with the 9075, we have an elevated beat frequency of 4 Hz with a smoother sweeping second hand in the process, as well as getting that introduction of a true GMT, a first for Miyota as a movement manufacturer. So in the world of GMT watches, there are essentially two different types of movements. You have collar or office GMTs, and the typically much more elusive and in turn more expensive true GMT calibers. Now, to briefly illustrate the difference, with an office GMT, moving the crown to the second position facilitates the isolated function of the additional 24-hour hand, not your local hour hand, as is the case with a true or traveler's GMT that we have here, which was traditionally significantly more expensive and allows for fewer fewer steps when changing the time zone, while also not stopping the balance in the process to not interrupt timekeeping when you are changing that time. Now, recent years, there have been an introduction of more attainable GMT watches from the likes of Tudor, Longines, Mito, Seiko, Bulova, and now other micro brands. But as far as I can tell, no one has yet been able to place a true GMT into a watch that at full retail comes under $600. In operation, the 9075 feels great as well, with suitable feedback as well as pleasing audible click when adjusting that local hour hand in either direction, and in turn allowing you to adjust the date both forward and backward. But that considered, it can lead to a more tedious setting of that date if you did have this one sitting on, say, your dresser for an extended period of time and having to advance that date forward rather than having that traditional quick set at that second position. A reality for frequent travelers that is well worth it. Now, given the smaller batches of this brand, we wanted to also test this model for accuracy despite not having any proudly stated accepted range of accuracy. And we were actually not disappointed at all in this case. We tested it across 5 different positions, and it was running at a -2 to +1 seconds a day range across 5 positions, which is very, very solid. And again, I want to stress that you can't take this metric to the bank, but it does go to show the potential of these 9000 series Miyota calibers, and that clearly there were some steps for regulation happening here before this watch was shipped out, which compared to a lot of other brands that are in this price segment, it's more just about casing up a movement rather than actually regulating them. So well played. In terms of general operation here, 28,800 vibrations per hour, 4 Hertz, features hacking and hand winding, hacking stop in the second hand when you pull the crown to the farthest position, and a power reserve of 42 hours. So as I alluded to earlier, Laurier has a tendency towards old school designs and proportions that feel ripped right out of the mid-20th century, with the Falcon coming in at a 36mm case and the Neptune at 39mm. Now, viewed through that lens, the 41mm diameter of this new Hydra is actually the brand's largest watch to date. Though when factoring in the other elements, you begin to see that that doesn't really tell the full story on wear. The lug to lug, for one, is incredibly compact, coming in at just 46mm, which is more abbreviated than most 39mm watches, let alone a 41mm. For context, this is 1mm smaller than that of the lug to lug of a 38mm khaki field mechanical, which in totality is going to make this watch wear smaller on wrist. Now, one of the co-founders, Lorenzo, who started this company in partnership with his wife, Laura, clearly cares deeply about nailing size, given that he has a preference of smaller case sizes as somebody with a smaller wrist. The only aspect of this case that I think, in my opinion, you can look towards maybe being classified as larger is going to be the thickness, of which is going to be 14.6mm when measuring with that domed acrylic crystal on top, and a combination with that movement height with the higher water resistance rating. I would argue that the Hydra wears closer to a 39mm on wrist, a mass appealing size that's going to work for the vast majority of wrists out there, primarily for those that have a propensity to champion those classic wearing dimensions of decades prior. Further enhancing the positive wearing experience that is going to be on display here is the bracelet, which offers a number of traits more commonly seen on more expensive watches, including screwed-in link adjustment and a clasp pairing stamped and milled components. Tapering from 20mm at the lugs to a slender 16mm at the clasp, the combination of relatively small bracelet links and 3 points of micro adjustment on the clasp mean that finding a perfect fit should be no big deal for most. The Hydra's case combines an old school feel with finishing that measures up to modern standards, primarily executed with vertical brushing. It integrates broad curvaceous case sides topped with a wider than usual polished facet that adds visual interest. On top, a 120 click unidirectional lapse time bezel with a polished coin edge and its own acrylic cap keeps watch over the dark gray insert that is also loomed with blue BGW9 Superluminova. At 3, a screw down crown lacks crown guards but screws deeply into the recessed area of the case, pairing with the screw down case back and achieving a solid 200 meters of water resistance for this diving GMT. And as a note, the Hydra's case back looks rather simple at first, but it also is going to allow room for optional engraving that can be done for a small upcharge. Turning the Hydra back around, we have the aforementioned acrylic crystal that offers the box cross-section profile so commonly associated with vintage dive watches. While it's rare to see these days on anything other than Omega Speedmaster or something like a Timex Marlin, acrylics are going to have a visual warmth that is tough to match while also being easily polished if it does become scratched, with Laurier even covering you on that point, including a tube of poly wash with each Hydra model. Set just beneath, we have a dial that also blends modern and vintage aspects with a matte finished dark gray central surface. The Hydra leaves plenty of room for a massive white 24-hour ring at its circumference. The indices are printed in simple geometric forms and loom with BGW9 superluminova, meaning your timekeeping functions will all glow blue while your 24-hour indication will glow green. The loom itself is also awesome, something that micro brands seem to get right more often than major brands do in many instances. The handset feels very vintage with a tapered and polished arrow for local hours and an almost Dauphine style minute hand contrasting nicely from the bright red shade used on that GMT hand that also has a loom diamond shaped tip. Dial text is there, but much smaller than I would have perhaps seen, with Laurier's logo at 12 and Hydra 200 meters in GMT in very small text at 6 with a simply cut date aperture just below. Now some of the dial elements are certainly borrowing from more established watch designs, but altogether this feels like Laurier's own execution, not pulling from just one distinct place. So for some final thoughts here, I first want to discuss quickly some of the pros and cons of this piece in general, but further, I really want to, more importantly, close this video with what I think a watch utilizing this movement means for the market at large. Now, to begin with some of the primary cons, I think the first one to come up for many will be the acrylic crystal and insert. Now, there is something to be said about the look of an acrylic that can't be overstated, and that it is easy to buff out those scratches if you have something like Polywatch, which they are going to cover you on that front. I still do believe, though, that many prefer the modern perks of sapphire by comparison, regardless of the looks of acrylic. In addition, the crystal distortion will impact the inner 24-hour scale on the inside at a certain angle, making it harder to read when looking at it from specific vantage points. And finally, although it is not fully felt in wear, the case is going to be slightly thicker than the norm for some of Laurier's other models. But then shifting to the pros, this watch has solid finishing across the board. The bracelet is well done and has adequate points of micro adjustment. The water resistance offers great peace of mind, and the regulation on this movement is very well appreciated, considering this is sometimes an afterthought for brands in this price tier. The design is very tasteful, not pulling from any one single place too much, and the lume also shines quite well after a small exposure to light. Yet the main reason this watch is exceptional goes back to that main point I've been talking about, and it also leads to dovetailing to a larger concept that means just bigger changes for the market at large. What we have seen in the past couple of years with GMT movements has been notable, especially with the shift in the entry-level pricing with Seiko's 4R34 GMT movement unveiled with the SSK models, and then Miyota's 9075. These were, of course, important as a result of them inhabiting watches from their own corresponding group. However, what is more significant regarding these innovations with the movements is that what this would mean for the larger, broader market and third parties. Since Miyota and Seiko are in the business of selling movements, it was only a matter of time before these were made available to the extensive landscape of watchmaking. And in less than a year, we have already seen several small brands throw in some amazing takes at incorporating this new caliber. In particular, with the 9075, the first to make waves and hit my shores was the Traska Venturer GMT with a price of $695 for that true GMT movement. And then to follow, you had brands like Verer and Boulder that came out with their own takes around the same price, as well as others that are getting honestly hard to keep up with at this point. And now with a watch like this Laurier cutting under $600 for his retail price for this movement, it is now a race to the top by racing to the bottom. In other words, a playful competition on what brand can deliver the most value-packed watch for the money. By some metrics, it's kind of a discouraging time to be a watch enthusiast as it pertains to hype culture. Though by many other measurements, you could argue right now is the single best time to be a watch enthusiast, as we have never been as lucky as we are currently to have this level of variety of watches available to us, especially under $1,000. And with movements now like this being available to the market at large and watches like this Laurier becoming available for under $600, I think this is great things for us to look forward to looking ahead. And I think this is one of those watches that marks that change in front of us. But what's your take on just this watch, this subject in general? Love to see some comments down below. Are there some other watches out there that maybe I'm not even aware of yet that are using this movement and you think are doing a good job? Or also any other movements of this type that are just producing crazy value in the market? I know it's a tough landscape to stay on top of from my perspective, but if you have some, leave some comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Also check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, how we're able to fund all of our productions here is through selling watches on our site. So if you are in the market for a watch, definitely check us out. We'd love to have your business. We know you can buy a watch pretty much anywhere nowadays, but it allows us to keep doing what we're doing, and we absolutely love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.